Hey, so I wanted to talk about sleep schedules, and my sleep schedule has been messed up for most of my life. So I've learned some things that are very useful for trying to combat that. Everybody's different. People with different sleeping problems have different problems, and there's different ways to try to tackle that. But in my case, I've had it's like being on, if you think of being on like a 25-hour schedule where you might be okay for a few days, but then it's going to slowly go out of phase, slowly shift. And, a week later, instead of falling asleep at midnight, you're falling asleep at 7 in the morning. It's really pretty much turns you into a dysfunctional human being. Um, as far as I'm concerned, in my head, it's like a serious disability, but I don't think it's recognized officially as such. I don't know. I haven't checked. Maybe there is such a thing, but at least in the way that people commonly talk about this kind of stuff, you don't normally hear people referring to that as a disability, and that kind of adds to the difficulty of it. Um, Maybe I'll look it up because I've seen a couple times. There's a name for this kind of disorder. It's not insomnia. If I fall asleep, I can get enough sleep, assuming I'm not woken up or have to get up for some reason. But it's more of this like constantly shifting thing where you're constantly, it's constantly shifting. Now, if you're on a schedule like you're in school, back when I was in school, um, it didn't necessarily I didn't know that it was necessarily shifting. I just couldn't fall asleep at night at all. And, um, part of the difficulty is like my father would never listen. He didn't want to hear any. He was very impatient about this whole concept, right? Like my father goes to bed at not like 10 o'clock is late for him. Usually it's 9 or 10. He falls asleep very early. He actually has trouble staying asleep. He wakes up very early in the morning. But so he has like the opposite problem as I do, which is weird. But anyway, so he when I was growing up was just super super impatient. Now, some people might have come here because they're looking for this solution. I have this. There's a technique that I've learned that helps a lot. It's really science based actually. But I'm just going to talk about my personal experience. So I'll try to put in a timestamp or something where you can skip if you just want to jump to that. But anyway, I'm going to share a bit of my experience. So yeah, my father, of course, was always very impatient about this. Didn't want to view it as a problem, because to him it's like, go to bed earlier, lie in bed, close your eyes. And I knew that doesn't work. In fact, now later, sometimes when I look up about this stuff, I see the advice for people struggling to fall asleep, that they should wait until they're tired before they go to bed. And I've only seen that advice in the last few years. I don't think now when I was the internet came into being, or at least in people's households when I was in elementary school. So, back in the day, there wasn't a whole lot of information on the internet. I can remember a time when you didn't necessarily go to the internet to immediately find information. But so I've just seen it in the last few years where they now say, maybe they always said it, but I've just noticed lately that they say that you should wait until you're tired, which is really relieving to hear because that's been my experience. If I try to go to bed, if I try to sleep before I'm tired, very occasionally I will fall asleep. Maybe I'd give it like a 5 to 10% chance. But what's far more likely is I become frustrated and annoyed, and then it makes sleeping even harder, and it backfires. So anyway, so that's one thing. Yeah, but it's tough because people. This is. I mean, it's very common that people have some issues falling asleep. So people, I think, sort of project that onto someone like me, and think, well, I understand. Oh, I get it. Like, it sucks when you only have 6 hours of sleep, and it's a different level of problem. But let's talk about what one of the main solutions would. Well, I say solution. It's sort of a technique, I guess. It's not necessarily going to solve all your problems, but basically it's just waking up in the morning and going outside and getting exposure to sunlight. So when I looked up about, at some point when I was maybe, I think I was 23 or something like that, I looked online about, I think I searched for scientifically, something like science evidence fall asleep or something. Like, I was looking for the science on it, or science-backed strategies for falling asleep earlier, because there's a million techniques to try to fall asleep earlier. But I was curious, what is there actual scientific evidence for? Hold on, I'm gonna sip my water. And there were two things. One is exercise, and the second is waking up early and going outside to get exposure to sunlight. That helps to set your circadian rhythm. Now, I'm not going to talk about exercise in this video because it's rather obvious. And if you're really struggling, you've tried that. And in my experience, one thing is, if I exercise in the evening, basically after it's dark, that kind of backfires. There's enough adrenaline in my system to actually make it harder to sleep often. Now, exercising for an hour or two, probably, it does help. In the past, it was never enough to solve my problem. I did sports in high school, and this was not solving the problem at all. And I've tried many, many times, like, okay, I'll go to the gym. Okay, I'll start exercising 1 or 2 hours a day, whatever. Trying to solve the problem with exercise has never been enough for me. Now, I did once work in a restaurant, and if you're doing 7 or 8 hours a day of work where you're on your feet moving around, that makes a much bigger difference to me than just the 1 or 2 hours of exercise. So that's something to maybe worth trying as well. But and I suppose maybe that's part of the problem, is that when I was growing up, going to school, you're sitting in a classroom so much that even though I'm exercising after school with sports, it wasn't enough. And I'll probably talk about caffeine later too, because that's a whole monkey wrench in my life, although I love caffeine. But anyway, let's talk about this waking up early, getting sun. I mean, it's kind of rather obvious, but anyway, but let's talk about it. So there are some details that are important. Now, my understanding is that when sunlight goes into your eyes, or, could be just, it doesn't have to be sunlight. It can be other frequencies, not the whole, it doesn't have to be sunlight. Well, sunlight is a whole spectrum of various frequencies. But, right, it could be your screen that you're looking at. And so the light gets in your eyes, and I believe that this stops production of melatonin, helps set your circadian rhythm. Now, pretty much every cell in your body, I'm not sure about 90% of the cells in your body are actually bacteria in your gut, mainly in your gut. And I suspect maybe for them too, but pretty much all your cells have a number of genes related to setting circadian rhythm. It's kind of like an ancient thing going way back to way before we were humans. Probably to way back before we were even multicellular life, probably, that there are all kinds of processes that are good to have maybe once a day for a cell, right? So cells have a lot of genes related to setting some kind of rhythm, usually kind of a 24-hour cycle. There's in fact, it's either a gene or it's a set of genes called clock, actually. It might be an acronym. If you're interested in that kind of stuff, it's interesting to look into and might give you some sort of useful background information to look into, like clock gene or genes. Obviously circadian rhythm and how that works in the brain, and it's your whole body, really. It's all your cells, really. And of course there's melatonin production and this kind of stuff, but I'm not going to talk too much about that. I'm not a scientist, and I don't know that much to tell you, but these are things for background knowledge that are good to look into. But yeah, so your body's setting a circadian rhythm, or hopefully it's a circadian rhythm in many different ways. But exposure to sunlight is a major one. They've done experiments with quail, actually, like the kind of the go-to for experimenting in ways that are similar to humans is mice. However, mice are not good for experimentation related to sleep cycles, because mice, sometimes they're said to be nocturnal, but they actually have sleep schedules that just kind of like intermittently sleeping and being awake, because they are prey, so they have to kind of always be wary of being attacked, right? Whereas quail have better sleep cycles, and their brains have been studied. So there's some interesting science related to quail and sleep cycles and melatonin production, this kind of stuff. Hold on one second. So quail, I've had quail before. They will wake up in the morning, they sleep during the night, and exposure to light will wake them up in general. Some people have quail in a room where light is on all the time. Some people, I've never done that. Some people view that as inhumane. I kind of lean towards agreeing with the people who view that as inhumane. It's sort of done partly to, if you want quail to keep laying eggs in the winter, people will use lights and stuff because that kind of stuff gets set by how much light they're exposed to. So you can sort of hack it by giving them artificial light. But I've had them and they wake up in the morning in response to light. So yeah, it's like clockwork with the quail. And humans to some degree are similar. Now, to some degree, of course. So also, there seems to be something about the morning sun. So I'm going to say it's really 6:30 or 7, but I'm just going to say like 7 a.m. to, I'll say 8:45. That this period, now of course it depends on your latitude and the time of year and all that stuff. So suppose the sun is rising at 6 a.m., then roughly this time period is right, like the most juicy time period. If I wake up at 11, going outside in the morning basically does nothing, or it even kind of backfires. It might even actually be better not to. I'm not really sure when it comes to 11. 9 to 10 is really sort of the gray area. It's sort of going out at 9 is better than not going out at 9, I would say. And again, it depends on, but I'm saying, like, imagine the sun is rising at like 6. Now you can go out earlier, it's like 6:30, but I would really recommend, roughly an hour after the sun rises, going outside. There's going to be differences in the spectrum of light based on the angle of the sun to the horizon. It's just like when you see a sunrise or sunset, right? The sun looks really red. That's because it's being red shifted. So, and even if it's an overcast day, in my experience, it being overcast doesn't really damper this effect. It's totally fine. It's good. The light is getting bounced off in sort of clouds or, whatever it is, water vapor in the atmosphere. But it's still a lot of light. Like that moment when you open the door to go outside, even though it's overcast, your eyes adjust, right? Like it might even seem bright out, right? You might be like, oh, it's kind of bright out despite being overcast. And just sitting in bed looking at a screen is not enough light to do this for you. I've never experimented with artificial lights or something like that. But that feeling when you open a door and go outside and it's bright and your eyes adjust, you even I think you'll feel a change in your mood, right? From doing that. So this is really the good time to go out there. About an hour to 2 hours after sunrise, I guess. But experiment and see what works for you. And I would recommend 20 to 30 minutes. If you really want to do good, 45 minutes is even better probably, but 20 is a little low, to be honest. So if you're trying this for the first time, I definitely shoot for like 20 to 30 minutes and see if it should have an effect on your sleep cycle. And I think this is actually good for everybody. People who are not having trouble with their sleep schedules. Going outside in the morning, getting exposure to sun, I think is a really good thing. You get a nice little walk in the morning, so you get a little exercise, light exercise, and just sort of saying hello to the sun is really valuable for a lot of things. I think it boosts your mood, gives you vitamin D, getting fresh air, it's good, and it helps with your circadian rhythm. There's just a ton of things that this is going to help with. And actually, generally, I'm a pretty happy person, and I think part of it is because I'm walking outside in the morning every day. Though I do struggle with this sleep stuff. I don't want to get... that's the main thing, and this is, I'm very sure, scientifically backed to help. And back when I researched about this more than 10 years ago, these are the only two things I found. I think I was reading an article that said these are the two things for which there's evidence that it helps. So that's what I recommend. Now I will talk a little more about what's going on with me, just in case people might be curious. There was a big earthquake here nearby in Japan on January 1st. And actually my sleep schedule had been good for like a year and a half. Now, so when I came to Japan, I started getting addicted to caffeine. So I probably want to talk about that a little bit. Because caffeine can really mess with you. Also, you'd think that... See, like... Well, if you're a coffee drinker, I guess you just have to experiment and see how it works with you. But I think the mistake that a lot of people are making is they think that a coffee at 3 p.m. or even at noon is going to have no effect on their sleeping. And I've verified, for me, 100%, caffeine can still influence me 12 hours later. Some people will be skeptical of that. that's fine. I mean, imagine your gut getting soaked in coffee. Not all of that is going to be gone out of your system just in 3-4 hours, right? When you research about this, they usually talk about a half-life of caffeine in your system. I think that probably the truth is slightly more complicated, right? It's not going to be as simple as just it's this nice, neat mathematical formula that exactly describes it. So like I said, I think like if you ate a bunch of rice and then had black coffee, it's going to soak in that rice in your gut. And how long is that going to take to digest, or if it's meat or whatever? So you might have a slow drip of caffeine in your system for a while. Now, I'm super sensitive to caffeine, and I love caffeine. So, but it's really, I did a little bit when I was in high school and that kind of stuff, to stay up late to finish papers. Another thing that's like crazy is the soft drinks, giving soft drinks to kids that have caffeine in it, including Coke. It's really bad because people respond differently to caffeine, and it's just sad that there's parents for whom caffeine doesn't really mess with their sleep schedule much, but then they're giving Coke to a kid who's drinking it at 3 in the afternoon or even at night, and there's tons of kids out there, I'm sure, their sleep schedule is getting completely screwed because they're sensitive to caffeine and they're drinking Coke. I drink Diet Coke, I guess. Here it's called Coke Zero. I'm not against Coke, all right? I don't have a thing against it. People are like, oh, high fructose corn syrup, evil. Fructose is the same sugar in fruit. I'm sorry, whether it's in a Coke or in a grape, it's the same chemical. Sorry to burst a bubble for a lot of people, but you can talk about everything else that's in there. Like a fruit has other stuff in there that's good for you, and it has fiber, which might help to balance things out. But fructose is fructose, whether it's in a Coke or an apple. So anyway, so I'm not one of those people who's like anti-Coke, but I'm for awareness about caffeine and that some people are sensitive to it. Now, I was usually not drinking Coke, luckily, when I was a kid. I was usually drinking Sprite. I think I knew about the effects of the caffeine, but it's probably a monkey wrench, because it probably was a monkey wrench in my life, because it only takes really just one day to totally screw up my sleep schedule, actually. That's why it's so hard. But particularly 2 or 3 days of being screwed up, and I'm going to be screwed up for a good while. Now, on January 1st, there was this big earthquake. The big earthquake was not what really messed me up. What messed me up was months of aftershocks at all kinds of different times of day. And so I still haven't recovered. Yeah, so anyway, I came to Japan like 15 years ago, and that was like a year or two after I figured out how to... I basically fixed my sleeping problems for a good, I think it was like 6 months before I came to Japan. And then for some reason, it just wasn't working in Japan. And in Japan, you have these vending machines with little cans of coffee in it. And I think I started drinking coffee at like 3 in the afternoon and thinking it wasn't going to mess with my sleep schedule. So, but it was. And I became very addicted to caffeine, which has been true like last almost 15 years. And it's good and bad. Anyway, long story short, this earthquake really messed up my sleep schedule. I just haven't recovered. And it's really frustrating now. Like the first 4 or 5 months, I was like, okay, I worked on a lot of math because I can't really get a job when my sleep schedule is completely messed up. So it's really frustrating. But now it's like we're at July 1st, and my sleep schedule is still messed up, and it's really frustrating. But there's all kinds of things to try. I mean, I'm still drinking a lot of coffee. Yeah, it's chaos though. Anyway, wish me luck. But I thought I would talk about it because we need more awareness of people who are sensitive to caffeine, but also this sort of drifting sleep schedule thing. I'll see if I can find, if I forget, remind me, but I'll see if I can find the name of it. It's like, it has a name, it's a condition. It's like insomnia, a different kind of insomnia kind of thing, you know. And it really messes with people because it's really hard to make any kind of social commitment because you're worried that you can't predict your sleep schedule ahead of time, and you're worried that you're going to be totally exhausted and ready to sleep right when your friends want to meet up. And this was trouble with my father as well, because when I was 19, you know, like, oh, come over to my place at 1 in the afternoon or whatever, and it's like, you know, I remember one time we were skiing, and I would, anytime we stood, like I was on my skis with my poles, and I would fall asleep standing up. He looked at me one time, are you asleep? Yeah, and imagine, okay, you're going to meet up with your dad at 1 in the afternoon, and it's 9 a.m. and you can't sleep. And you're just like, well, do I sleep for 2 hours? Or do I just stay up? Maybe you decide to stay up. You're just totally dead, exhausted, you know. And you have an impatient father who totally will not accept this problem, right? So it's a bit rough. It's a bit rough. Anyway, I'm okay. I'll be fine. Got a lot of other things going for me, I guess, in life, but it's a little tricky, I gotta be honest. So wish me luck, and I wish best of luck to you too. Leave a comment if you're having trouble with your sleep. Let us know what's up. Best of luck to you. Have a good one. Bye.